Welcome to the Explainer. Imagine, if you will, that you and I are looking down from an ancient, shadowed balcony. Down below us, there's this incredibly noisy, decadent party just raging on. And from up here, kind of like a weary elder who's watched generations rise and fall, we're going to dive into a cautionary bedtime story. It's a grim, dark Gothic fable about the village of the Everwatchful, a society that spent its entire existence building these massive, heavy gates to keep out the absolute wrong threat.
So, our elder leans in and tells us in this hushed, almost gravelly voice how these villagers literally spent lifetimes obsessing over the shadows. They were absolutely terrified of beasts with fire and horns, constantly looking over their shoulders for jagged teeth. But here's the thing, the real Rot didn't roar. No, he walked right through the front gates wearing this incredibly elegant red suit, complete with an exaggerated feather in his hat. And get this, they warmly invited their own doom right inside, not because he overpowered them, but because he was uncomfortably human. He just looked like some theatrical performer or, a neighbor you'd pass on the cobblestone streets.
It's such a fascinating contrast when you look at the imaginary threat versus the actual one. On one hand, you have the Nightwalkers. The village elders wrote these massive, heavy scrolls about this hidden cabal, totally convinced they were out in the woods performing impossible, lurid rituals. But then, on the other hand, you have the true danger, the Crimson Guest, and he was just disturbingly ordinary. The villagers spent all their energy actively hunting these loud, fantastical beasts, completely missing the quiet, familiar reality of the guest right in front of them. He didn't need to make the earth shake to conquer them. He just had to appear normal to completely dismantle their vigilance.
So, what exactly were these Nightwalkers? Well, the painful truth is, they were just ghosts of the villagers' own making. All those heavy scrolls, the late-night hunts, the whispered rumors, literally just comfortable lies. The villagers used these manufactured monsters because it was so much easier than facing the real, festering corruption inside their own minds. The Nightwalkers were just physical projections of their own internal anxieties, their deep-seated insecurities, and, honestly, their collective hatred. By hunting their neighbors in the dark, they were really just trying to outrun their own hidden internal states, projecting all that unconscious baggage right onto the physical world.
And this is exactly why the Crimson Guest was so devastatingly effective. I mean, he didn't show up with an army, right? The seduction of the Shadow relied entirely on familiarity. He just appeared as an elderly, familiar neighbor. He didn't use force, he used reason. With just this subtle little curve to his lips, he'd offer perfectly reasonable suggestions and contracts. If a blacksmith was tired, he offered him rest. If someone was ambitious, he offered power. He essentially acted as a visual bridge to their deepest, most secret desires. He just quietly planted the seeds of doubt from within and then stepped back to let their own dismantled humanity do all the heavy lifting. Now, when these weary villagers finally stopped and stood before a mirror, the realization was absolutely chilling. The evil they finally recognized wasn't some monstrous creature from the woods. No, the true horror was right there in the glass. They had welcomed a guest who looked exactly like themselves. The Crimson Guest was just a reflection of a society that had already completely lost its soul. He simply held up a mirror to their own internal anxieties and forced them to actually see the rot they'd been ignoring for generations.
But the story doesn't just end with that grim realization. Let's look at how this builds. Following what the elders called the Great Unmasking, the village plummeted into this silent, gray despair. But instead of doing the hard work of genuine healing, they demanded a quick fix. They essentially built an architecture of manufactured joy. They desperately appointed one man to become a living mask. They drafted a jester, and they tasked him with the absolutely impossible public duty of restoring joy to their hollow, broken streets.
And this brings us right to a foundational psychological concept, the sad clown paradox. This jester was forced into a tragic act of emotional self-sacrifice. He worked incredibly hard to trigger mirth and make the whole village laugh, serving as this constant bright beacon of joy. But the paradox, and the real tragedy here, is that he was entirely unable to cheer himself up. While the village started smiling again, he was privately just drowning in profound isolation and internal despondency. He essentially became the scapegoat for their happiness, absorbing all their gray despair so they wouldn't have to deal with it. Notice the profound duality happening here. Both of these figures, the Crimson Guest and the Jester, they both act as these deep, emotional mirrors for the village, and they both wear vibrant red. You've got the guest, the tempter, in the elegant red suit, who unmasks the village's hidden corruption by exploiting their secret desires. And then, completely on the flip side, you have the jester, in his red courtly garb, masking that exact same despair by projecting public joy. Both figures perfectly represent that dangerous, super fragile bridge between our comfortable public personas and the really dark, hidden truths of our internal states.
The tragedy of the jester is it's profound. Think about it. Emotional self-sacrifice is basically burning yourself out to provide light for a room you can no longer even see. Imagine the sheer isolation of being required by your very job description to be the life of a party you cannot emotionally join. The jester used humor merely as a shield for his own hidden vulnerability. And the crazy part? The louder the village laughed, the deeper his isolation became. He was completely, fundamentally disconnected from the very joy he was manufacturing for everyone else.
Now, let's step out of the fictional village for a second, because this exact Gothic tragedy actually played out in historical reality. Back in the year 1514, there was this massive real-life tragedy, the loss of the city of Smolensk. Fast forward to 1862, and the great artist John Matejko sets out to capture this heavy history on canvas. He paints his famous work, Stanchik, which features a solitary jester dressed in vibrant red. And even now, in the present era, this painting endures, not just as some dusty history lesson, but as a deeply intimate, really haunting psychological study of the artist's very own soul.
The details in Matejko's masterpiece are actually staggering when you look at the parallels to our fable. There sits Stanchik in the foreground, just steeped in solitary melancholy. Meanwhile, right behind him, this decadent, roaring party is in full swing. It's such a stark, chilling visual contrast. But you know what the most incredible detail is? The jester doesn't have the face of some historical Renaissance figure. Matejko actually gave the jester his own face. It's a completely desolate self-portrait, revealing that the man providing the world with art and social commentary was suffering from the exact same sad clown paradox. It shows the creator as the absolute most isolated spectator of society's joy.
So this brings us to a super fascinating look at the human condition, comparing the public duty to the private reality. Why does modern society still demand this painful disconnection? Honestly, we seem to vastly prefer the comfortable lie of a manufactured smile, that vibrant living mask, over the difficult, messy truth of actual human despair. Just like the village of the ever-watchful, we constantly trade our collective anxieties for the private, silent isolation of the people who maintain our facades. We demand they perform their public duty, basically just so we don't have to look at our own shadows.
As we draw this grim Gothic fable to its climax, there's a specific truth that just hits incredibly hard. The most dangerous evil is not a creature in the woods, but the one that understands and mirrors us. Whether it was through the quiet, super reasonable temptation of the Crimson Guest or the tragic, emotional sacrifice of the jester, the village learned a pretty devastating lesson. The deepest horrors, they aren't hiding out there in the dark forest. They are internal. They're the compromises we make, the secret desires we hide, and the masks we literally force each other to wear every single day.
To wrap up the Weary Elder's tragic tale, we have to look at what ultimately became of the jester. He didn't just save the village, right? He absorbed its darkness. He became the ultimate internal state of a completely broken society. The village traded genuine human connection for a melancholic facade, and by doing that, they created a brand new kind of Nightwalker. Only this one didn't haunt the physical woods. Instead, the jester just sat in the shadows in his red costume, forever haunting the darkness of his own mind, basically ensuring the village never had to face its true reflection ever again.
Which leaves us with one final, deeply provocative thought as we wrap up this explainer. The fable of the Crimson Mask is really just a mirror held up to all of us, asking us to confront the comfortable lies we tell ourselves in the dark. So, I'm going to leave you with this haunting question from the Weary Elder. When you look into your lonely mirror tonight, who is wearing the red suit? Thank you so much for exploring this dark fable with me. Keep asking those hard questions, keep looking past the masks, and I'll see you in the next explainer.